But thank you for joining me today. I'm Jordan Morrow. I'm going to just jump into an intro slide for you, and I'm going to get the elephant in the room out of the way very quickly. I don't look like the guy in that picture right there. All my hair is gone, and I get asked it quite a bit now. I just get tired of having hair. There's nothing to it. I prefer having a buzz cut versus the hair. So now that that's out of the way, let's actually jump into the presentation. Let me introduce myself a little more. I apologize for a scratchy voice. This is the third presentation I've done this morning, and so hopefully my voice will stay strong throughout it. But my name again, Jordan Morrow. I've been at Pluralsight now for just under 3 months. I've been a Pluralsight author for quite a bit longer than that. And my role here is head of data and design management skills, really to build a broad-based learning platform all around these fields. My background, my nickname in the industry is the Chief Nerd Officer. So I love this stuff. I love data and analytics. I love being able to talk about it, share some ideas and thoughts. I started off at American Express, running large data and analytics group there. I went to Click, where I pioneered and built the world's first data literacy program. And then when Pluralsight had an opportunity to come over to build learning around this whole world of data and analytics, I jumped at the opportunity. So in the interest of time, let's just jump in to talk a little bit about what I'm going to go through as I present to you today. First agenda item is I really want to just kind of set a foundational tone for us around what the world of data looks like today. From there, I want to move us into a new way of thinking, a new way of looking at a data-driven organization. I'm going to give us 5 pillars to enable us to do that. And then finally, we're going to talk about a step-by-step process that we can do both individually to become more data-driven, and then from an enterprise perspective, what an organization can do to make it happen. What can we do? And this roadmap that I'm going to give you, something I actually believe in a lot. I use it strategically myself for different things that I tackle. And so we want to make sure that we lay it out for you, for yourself and for your enterprise to be able to do that. So let's jump into this first topic. Now, the one thing I should say is, yes, we're going to spend probably 35 minutes all around the presentation side of this. And then we'll open it up for Q&A. We might have questions, we might not, and that's great. Either way works fine by me. So let's start off talking about the world of data. Now, one clean thing I want to put at the forefront of this section is the world of data shifted almost exactly a year ago, right? This world of using data and analytics to succeed in business, in life, or whatever we want to call it, was already steamrolling ahead. Some of the most desired skills in business were data and analytical skills. Then COVID-19 happened. And what we saw was not a shift in that mentality. We actually saw an increase in that mentality. At the time, I worked for my previous company, and I was already involved with a lot of organizations in trying to help them to become more data-driven, to build better strategies, et cetera. Soon as the shutdowns occurred, my calendar blew up even more. And I think the reason for that was a lot of organizations thought at the time that they were data-driven, that they were doing what they needed to be data-driven. As soon as you shut down economies, as soon as you lock people at home with quarantines and lockdowns, and organizations started to try and use data to make decisions, they found they weren't necessarily as prepared as they had thought they were. That caused a big holdup, if you will, in this. Since that time, this term being a data-driven organization or a data-driven culture has taken on a life of its own. It's gotten bigger. It's moving forward faster. So when we talked about what topic we wanted me to cover in a webinar, and this is the first in a 3-part series, I jumped at the opportunity to do one on building a data-driven organization. So that's why you're seeing this today. Now, part of the dynamic that we're experiencing in data and analytics today is this kind of dichotomy, if you will, between data and a human element. Data is just data. It literally, quite literally, just sits there. It's not until we do something to it that it makes a difference. We have to get data to turn into value, and that's where analytics comes into play. What we need to do is we need to understand that there are 4 levels of analytics that will drive a data-driven organization. First off, we have descriptive analytics. This is describing things that have happened in the past. This is describing the things that matter. This is the thing that is going to describe what has occurred. But the thing we need to understand is it is just the first level of analytics. We have to move forward into diagnostic analytics. This takes data and helps us understand why things are occurring. So when we create this descriptive analytic, it doesn't necessarily show us why something occurred. We then get to the third level, which is predictive analytics. So if we understand what has happened, we then understand why it happened, we can then build a prediction around what will happen. This allows us to really start to paint this overall picture of data and analytics and bringing value to it. Now, the fourth level is really where the data and the analytics take over. This is prescriptive analytics. This is where AI, ML, the machines can take over, if you will, and build stuff for us. Very important, but at the same time, it's very advanced. In order for an organization to really succeed and be a data-driven organization, what you see in front of you is a puzzle. Each piece matters, but they're not going to be weighed the exact same. Descriptive and diagnostic will be the vast majority of the employees in the organization. Predictive and prescriptive are going to be the technical statistics, that side of the organization. But to be data-driven, we need a holistic approach for organizations to succeed with data to value. Now, in a data-driven world, I want us to think about three main pillars. You have analytics, data, and insights. All of them work together to formulate, if you will, value and decision-making for the organization to be data-driven. You're not going to have one without the other. But what I also want to clarify is these two key terms that I've put on the edge of the computer screen for you. This is signal versus noise. We live in a world today where almost pretty much anything you could think of is going to produce data in some way, shape, or form because of how connected we are. Even if you just go for a walk, right? I have my iWatch. If I go for a walk, it's like, oh, you seem to be walking. Should we be recording this? That's the reality that we live in. The vast majority of that data, though, from an organizational perspective, is just noise. And what I mean by signal and noise, I'm going to date myself a little bit here. If you remember driving around in a car or a radio at your house, when you have these little knobs that you turn back and forth to find your radio signal, your station, as you find it, you would hear all the static. That's noise. That's actually where these terms come from, signal versus noise. We need to be able to get through all the noise to find the signal. That is what the world of data is. That's where analytics come into play. The signal equates to the insights. The data is full of signal and noise. And analytics, this ability of a workforce to pull out the insight from the data, is what's going to help an organization move forward to truly be data-driven, to be able to make decisions as we go through this. And we're going to define that more as we keep going. Now, one of the things that I help pioneer, and I'm going to use the definition that we formulated at Click when I worked there, still the definition that they use. We need everybody in an organization to have different skills within data if they truly want to be data-driven. Now, one of the phrases I've said for years and I still stand by it is this: not everyone needs to be a data scientist, but everyone needs data literacy skills. Everyone needs to be able to utilize data in some way, shape, or form in an organization to be data-driven. Now, there is a spectrum of skills that are there. We've got reading data. This is that ability to comprehend it, right? If you put something in front of someone, can they look at it and get insight from that information? Working with the data, from someone just pulling up a spreadsheet or a chart, all the way to your advanced statistician running complex models, analyzing the information. I equate analyzing the information very clearly with gaining insight from it. And then finally, the fourth bullet point in this definition is the ability to communicate effectively with the data. It's one thing to find an amazing insight, an amazing find in the data. If you have no idea how to communicate that out to the masses, you might run into issues very quickly. So we need this ability to not only find all this information, find all the insight, we need a way to communicate it out and to communicate it effectively, getting rid of all the technical jargon and things like that, but to simplify and allow us to share it with people. Part of the issue that we do have on our way to being a data-driven organization is really that there is a skills gap within the data-driven organization. Click itself ran a large study that showed only about 1 in 5 people were confident in their data literacy skills. So as organizations during the pandemic wanted to drive data-driven decision-making, wanted to succeed, if you will, with data, found that that skills gap got in the way of their success in a big way. You can't have only 1 in 5 people confident with data and expect your organization to thrive with data. What if we were able to bump that up? What if we were able to help the organization reskill itself, if you will, to a level that allows us to get higher and higher on that food chain? That's what we want to do with a data-driven organization. Now, why in the world do we have this skills gap? Now, it's not just a data literacy skills gap if we look at things. There's a skills gap that paints a picture all over the world of data and analytics. First off, it's driven by just how much data is being produced. We're producing data faster than we can effectively consume data. Let me repeat that. We produce data faster than we can effectively consume it. We have 175 zettabytes. That's the prediction by the year 2025. If you don't know what 175 zettabytes is, I want you to take a pen and paper, write the number 175 followed by 21 zeros after it. That's 175 zettabytes worth of data. We just have too much. So people can feel overwhelmed. They can feel like they don't know what to do with it, etc. Another reason there is a gap, not just in skills, but in effective use of data, is the lack of strategy. I want to be very upfront on this. Buying a tool that uses data and analytics is not a strategy. A tool should be there to enhance a strategy. Finally, a lot of organizations do not know how to reskill and upskill their employees. So when we sit here and say we want to be data-driven, but we don't know how to change the skill set within our organization where we're democratizing data to everybody, which means giving it to everybody, we run into a problem. We're running into walls that, intentional or not, are being put up and impeding our progress to being able to use data and analytics effectively. This is actually where I spend a lot of my time, is talking with organizations in creating strategies, in creating ways to close data and analytical adoption gaps, if you will. Now, we're talking all about this foundational thought of data. What does it actually mean to be a data-driven organization? Now, there's a lot of things out there around being data-driven. You can find many definitions all over the internet if you want. What we're going to talk about is a data-driven culture. That's, to me, how we enhance a data-driven organization. Now, there's also a lot of things that go into a culture being successful. Data-driven is just one of them. But there are 5 pillars that I want to talk about that drive it. What is your data and analytical strategy? What data do you have and what technology do you have to improve it or to use it? Do you have data literacy? Is your workforce ready to use it? What kind of culture do you have existent at the organization today? And then what role does leadership play in ensuring that organization can achieve the success it wants from a data and analytical perspective? So let's dive into each one of these. First off, data and analytical strategy. Right now, over the years, as I've traveled the world and talking to organizations to understand kind of where their roadblocks are, what they're trying to do with data, etc., there is one common theme. Very rarely do they have an effective data and analytical strategy. They know that they need to use data, but they don't necessarily know why. A prime example, I was talking to a colleague, a friend executive before once, and he brought up a point, and I think I asked him a question that stimulated the point. And he said, if I ask 10 executives why they're moving data to the cloud, 3 of them will know why they're doing it. 7 of them will know that they need to do it, but they don't know why. That is a pretty common thing that I see. You hear organizations say, we want to use data. And then you say, okay, why do you want to use data? I don't know. I just know that we need to use it to be effective. So one of the key pillars to truly being data-driven is to stop just throwing money at data tools and sourcing of data and actually figure out what it is you want to accomplish with the data. In fact, my last section of the presentation is going to cover this exact topic. We need to understand effectively what it is that we are trying to do with data and analytics in order for us to be able to succeed as a data-driven company. Again, when the shutdown occurred in March of 2020, very quickly, my calendar blew up with a lot. I was product agnostic in my role at the time. So I worked with companies that either used the product that our company had or did not use it. A lot of companies that did not use our product came calling and said, can you help us build strategy? And what was interesting around it is these are some of the companies that you would think were probably using data effectively, but the adoption rates of those organizations in using data are going to be extremely low, much lower than you would think from an opportunity for organizations to succeed. Now, in perfect understanding on this, for me, there's one true data-driven company out there. I'll make that clear, and that's Amazon. I've looked at other companies and stuff, and I'm not seeing it as strong, but they're trying, and that's the good thing. So the first thing that we need to have a data-driven organization and culture is strategy. Second, we need leadership. So how many organizations, and I don't see everybody, normally I can ask this when I'm in person, of course, how many of your organizations have a chief data or chief analytics officer on site? And I'm not talking about a different member of the C-suite saying that they run the chief data office. I'm legitimately asking how many of your organizations have a chief data officer, a chief analytics officer, something along that. It is a very fast growing position, but a lot of companies still don't have it. We need leadership to take ownership of the data strategy that we've put in place, right? That way it can be cascaded down throughout the ranks of an organization and everybody can feel that it's important. Without that leadership buy-in, it becomes extremely tedious and extremely hard for an organization to get full adoption because people don't believe in it. So we need leadership to not only one, have the skill set and ability to put the right strategy in place, we also need them to lead the vision in a way that it's efficacious throughout the organization to be able to succeed. Number 3, data and technology. Do we have access to the data that we need? And do we have the technology that will help us analyze it in the manners that we need to? I think this is something very important to organizations. Now, again, we do not want to start with the technology, right? Don't sit there and say, I'm going to invest in Tableau or Click or Power BI, and that's my data strategy. What we need to do is have the strategy in place that will allow us to invest in the right data and technology. If we do that right, it will set itself apart. The right data and technology will fall in place if we do that correctly. Unfortunately, what I've seen across the globe is people buy the technology, they source the data, and then it comes to a standstill. And it's because they went in the reverse order. We're going to talk about the roadmap to how we do all this here in just a minute. Finally, or 2 more here, culture. How do we operate as a data-driven company? I've been asked for years, what is the number 1 roadblock for data and analytical success? Is it clean data? Is it the technology we have? What is it? It's culture of the organization. Do we have a workforce that is ready and willing to operate in a data-driven way, where it combines data with the human element? That can be scary. Whenever we hear the term culture, especially if we say, I want to change culture, we run into a problem. But these are necessary steps to a degree in order to take that transition from a company of 10 or 20 years ago into a company that's going to succeed as we move forward in the current economy and the future economy. And we're going to talk about the roadmap to this in just a second. Finally, data literacy, that 5th pillar that we need to discuss. Do people have the right skills to help us succeed? Right? I've met with multiple organizations, one in particular, I won't name it, and one in case they're on the call somewhere, but 2, because it's not necessarily the most glowing of review. In this organization, every business unit decided we need to have a data scientist. They didn't know why, but they said we need one. They hired them out, they put them throughout the organization, and those data scientists became very underutilized because there wasn't a culture for the data scientists to work with the orgs. There wasn't a strategy around everything to build it in place. This organization, God, I can't believe it's over 2 years ago, came to me and said, we've done all this, can you help us build this? Because they didn't have the strategy. They didn't know what they were doing. They kept hearing the hype around data science, right? There's a quote out there, it's almost a decade old, which dates me a little bit. It's almost a decade old, that basically said the sexiest job of the 21st century is the data scientist. Every nerd in the world that was a data scientist, myself included, we're not getting called sexy out there, you know what I mean? But what that did to organizations is it made them jump on this thought process that I need a data scientist. No, what you need is a data strategy. And with that strategy, we can then build properly the headcount, the positions, and the people that we need to make that strategy come to fruition. Prime example is an organization I was working with out of New Zealand. They took a step back. It's a smaller organization. They took a step back and basically started from scratch. They had been doing all this. They had a chief data officer. He's a brilliant man, but they took a step back and said, help us, right? We have technical debt. We have data debt. We have all this technology. We want to take a step back, build the right strategy, and move forward. That organization was doing it right versus haphazardly trying to do this. Now, the question then becomes, how do we do this? What is it that we can do that can help drive us to being a more data-driven organization? Well, I'm going to go with what I do, and this is a roadmap that goes through 5 different steps. And this one, I'm going to use an analogy. I'm an ultra marathon runner. I love to run ultra marathons. The reality around an ultra marathon is it follows almost precisely the 5 steps that I'm going to go over. So I'm going to bring it from my personal experience in that world and tie it to my personal experience in the data world. So let's talk about ultra marathons. When we take a look at an ultra marathon, what is it we want to accomplish? Well, to be personally and frank here, I want to get across the finish line without feeling like I'm going to die, right? That's the reality of a 50-mile race, a 100-mile race, whatever it is I'm going to tackle. But I know the outcome. What is it I'm trying to achieve? Driving that to data and analytics. Organizations across the globe. Let's take a look at one of the companies I've worked for, American Express. It is producing so much data just from one credit card swipe, right? It's doing the location. It's looking at your spending patterns, how much you spent as your demographics, all this data. What is it we're actually trying to accomplish? Remember, when we talked earlier about the signal and the noise, we have to understand, what outcome am I trying to achieve? Right? With an ultra marathon, I don't just sit there, enter into a race and say to myself, I don't know what I'm going to do. Right? I know what I want to do. We can't just invest in data and analytics without an outcome in mind. So that is step number 1. Figure out what it is that you're trying to accomplish with the data that you have invested in. Number 2, how do I then achieve that outcome? We create a strategy. So for example, going back to the ultramarathon, I have a 100-mile race in August this year, dream race. What I need to do is create a plan, and I'm doing this, that will over time get me to that goal or outcome of not dying when I cross that finish line. That's what we need to do within data and analytics. We have set our outcome. We set the outcome. We now can create a strategy that will get us to the outcome. Maybe we want to use data to improve customer relationships. Maybe we want to use data to improve marketing. I want to set one thing clear on this. The outcome that you're trying to achieve, you can have an overarching data strategy for your entire organization, but each business unit can have its own outcome of what they're trying to achieve. That then drives the strategy for that area of the business to achieve the outcome. Number 3 on this list, what technology do we need to give to people to accomplish the strategy we've just put in place? Again, a lot of times what I've seen on organizations is they've invested in the technology as step number 1. And then from there, they're going backwards trying to say, well, can this technology do this? Can it do that? When in reality, if we set that outcome and strategy first, it becomes easier to know what technology and tools we need to give ourselves, our employees to succeed. Number 4, what skills do we need to have in place to achieve steps 1 through 3? Going back to the ultramarathon side, I need to have the right shoes and everything for step 3. Do I have the right skills? Do I need to train differently? What do I need to do to close the skills gap to make that race happen? It's the same thing with the race to data and analytics. We're going to have people in the organization who need to be technical. We're going to have people in the organization who don't need to be technical. We're going to need to have people in the organization who just tell stories with the data. But if we go back many slides, we have a puzzle that we're trying to create. Closing the skills gap is a piece of that puzzle. Understanding the workforce, how it needs to be joined together, is a piece of that puzzle. Then step 5, is our workforce and organization actually ready? Can we create the right culture? Steps 1 through 4 make it much easier to create the culture that we want to help the organization succeed with data and analytics. I think that gets lost on people, is that we're always so quick to jump after the catchy thing. Data-driven culture is a very buzzworthy term. It is a very hyped up term right now. So many people are like, we define it here, we define it there. When in reality, all it is utilizing data to improve your business. And to do that effectively, we want to set the outcome that we want to achieve. What are we trying to accomplish? 2, how do I achieve that outcome? What strategy can I put in place to make this happen? I need to do X, Y, Z. 3, what technology do we need? Well, when you have a strategy, the technology more or less falls in place. For me, I kind of look at technology being a part of like a tool belt, if you will. You're going to have all these different things to achieve the strategy of building a house, but the house, the hammer is not the house. The hammer is a tool to make it happen. 4, what skills do we need? Do we have the right skills throughout our organization to bring this tool, to bring this technology, to bring this strategy and outcome to fruition? And then number 5, is the organization and environment that we are creating at our organization ready to make this happen? I like to think of number 5 in my ultramarathon training as, am I creating myself the right environment? Am I sitting on a couch every single night eating fast food? Am I creating the right environment? Or am I creating the environment by setting a schedule, etc.? That's what we need to do in the world of data and analytics. Far too often we overcomplicate it, and far too often we're setting our sights on things like the big stuff. We're setting it on AI and machine learning and let the robots take over. But the reality is we haven't even built a strong foundation. Let's start there. Let's create this data-driven organization so that the organization and individuals within the organization have an ability to truly succeed with it. Now, I get asked the question, how do you convince people of doing this? Now, one of the things I tell them is, if you set your sights huge, that's wonderful, but build a proof of concept. Build a proof of concept to show that you can do it. Ultra marathon. Can I even run a trail half marathon, right? Data and analytics. Can I accomplish this? Well, let's set our sights on a project that we can bring to fruition that helps us succeed. Now, with this in mind, I am a very open book on this. I want everybody who's on there, who's watching it live on LinkedIn and social media like Twitter and all of that, anyone who gets the live recording, connect with me. I am an open book on this. I'm happy to chat about it. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all of those fields. Please reach out to me with your questions. I get asked to coach. I get asked to build strategies all the time, and I love to do it. If you can't tell, minus the little hiccup we had in there earlier before, again, which I apologize. I love this world of data and analytics. I think there's power to it. I think it enables organizations and individuals to make smarter decisions. And we've seen it. We can see, and there are proof points of that happening. One final thing before we go into Q&A is Connect 2021. Look at these things for the skills group on March 2nd, 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 Eastern. You can go through the Bank New York Mellon. And then on the flow side, Thursday, March 11th, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. You can go through it. You can register for these events. So with that, Daniel, if you want to come back on and serve me up any questions that are out there. I've seen a couple, but I've been tentative to answer anything, waiting to see if my hotspot keeps in. So I'm glad that it did.
Yeah, no problem. Excuse me. And because you've probably been wondering, your audio has been fine. It's been clear the whole time since you come back. So that's good news. First question, when going through data transformation steps to build a data warehouse, is it best to invest time fixing and maintaining decades of data issues that are uncovered, or should the data warehouse account for these and ensure data integrity moving forward?
It's a very good question. A lot of organizations find themselves in this rabbit hole, if you will. We have years of databases and systems piling up one after another on it. We find errors in the system, etc. There isn't a blanket answer to this one. There isn't a one size fits all. It's going to depend on your organization. If the errors are just massive and too big, it can become something that is a challenge to try and clear it, to try and do things. If the database errors are not, then it can be accounted for. Some organizations have to start from scratch. I hate to say it that way, but they do. They have to clear years out of problems, because instead of fixing them when they came up, band-aids could have been put over in different things. So there isn't a blanket statement for this, but what I would say is, if when you know what you're trying to achieve, it becomes easier to understand, is this error okay to keep and account for? Is this error something we have to rid ourselves from? Or is this something we need to start from scratch, get clean data in, etc.? Like this company I mentioned out in New Zealand, their big thing was they basically wanted to start from scratch. They had issues, they had errors, they had all these things in place, but they understood that they had to clean things up appropriately, almost a clean sweep, in order to effectively be able to use data.
That's great. Laura asks, what do employers say is their most needed data skill, and how are they going about building those skills? Workshops, online training, etc.
The number one requested, I would say, data skill right now is data analyst, if I want to go from a persona or from a career perspective. The reason I say that is the number one requested, and you can look at trends that are occurring out there, is it's the massive employees. It's the massive employees that are out there. Not everyone's a data scientist. And usually a data scientist is trained in a way to effectively be able to use data. Now they have other skills they have to work on. Maybe it's the communication, the soft skills, et cetera. But what I would say the number one trending skill is data analytics from a data analyst perspective. Now I will also say the number one desired skill, or let me rephrase that, the number one growing job trend out there is the data storyteller. Now, a data storyteller from a name perspective can also be seen as a data author, a data translator. Basically, it's the individual who has a data analyst skill, but also has the business side. That's what data storytelling is. It's bridging the gap between data and technology and the business. McKinsey predicts by 2026 alone in the United States, 2 to 4 million jobs will be created around this data storyteller type role. 2 to 4 million jobs is unbelievable. When they made that prediction, of course, this was pre-pandemic, that would have, if all of those jobs were filled at once, it would have flipped and given us a negative unemployment rate. That's how many jobs are being filled here. So I would say now, the second half of your question is, what are companies doing around that? Not only do you need a data and analytics strategy, you need a data and analytics reskilling or upskilling strategy. What are you trying to achieve? Do you need more data analysts? Do you need more data scientists? Do you do this from hiring? Do you do this from reskilling? And every sort of modality of learning needs to be on the table. Workshops, online videos, quick wins, all of that needs to be a part of it. But again, and you hear me say this, I'm like a broken record over and over. It boils down to, do you have the proper strategy in place to reach an outcome, both from a data and analytics perspective to an outcome-based learning perspective? All of those things matter. But it's, again, you start with that strategy and backtrack into the success around things.
Great answer. Elise, this is a quick question. They ask, would you mind going back to the slide with the upcoming event so they can make note of it?
Yeah, I can leave that one up.
Awesome. And next question, are there any historical examples of corporate culture change that are good analogs to what you have been talking about?
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorite examples can come from Aramark, the food distributor company. I worked with them quite a bit when I was at Click. And Aramark hired basically what was a chief data and analytics officer. who came in with the right mindset of a good sound strategy that flowed all the way down to your frontline workers who might work in a Starbucks or somewhere else, where again, there is a varying need of skills that flows through an organization. That varying need of skills could be the frontline cashier. The only thing they need to know from a supervisor or whatever is, are they going to hit overtime, this or that? And how do you balance that? So they had this really cool app they would use on a phone that you could click it and say, oh, this is what's happening, shift it. Then it could go all the way and permeate. Now, this is a company, mind you, that has over 200,000 employees worldwide. So it's going to be a long haul sort of objective. Another company that I worked with building a culture and an organizational shift on this one was Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin has 111,000 employees worldwide. That a lot of people think you can take this on quickly. You can't. This is a massive change. So what we did with Lockheed Martin is we targeted a very small subset of individuals in the organization. I think we trained about 150 or so, basically to create an internal grassroots evangelist sort of method of spreading this throughout. One of the keys that Lockheed Martin had for the organization was leadership buy-in. Leadership fully bought in on what needed to happen. With that full leadership buy-in, we were able to then lead trainings, do consulting hours, all of this to create that army of employees. Now, these are massive organizations. From a small organization perspective, I'll go back to Loyalty New Zealand, which runs basically the whole tourism side of New Zealand. That right there was a small organization who basically started from scratch. But the way they did it, again, was they brought in leadership that could lead the charge. So there are absolutely examples out there, and there are others that I've worked with that are getting the process going. One of my favorite examples, and then I can move on, is the United Nations. The United Nations brought me in a little bit ago to start to help them with their data and analytical strategy. And then I wrote for them here in the fall of last year. The United Nations, if you think about their charge and their mission, is trying to do so much good and amazing things out there. The use of data is very effective for them. They're doing a cultural shift. The US Olympic Committee, who I met with just in November or December, is building a shift. I mean, it's exciting to see these things, but we have to remember that it takes time.
All right, next question. What are your other trainings on Pluralsight or any other platform that you recommend on this topic?
So, and I wasn't going to mention this because it becomes very self-serving. I actually have a book coming out next week. It launches overseas in EMEA and everything, called Be Data Literate, that dives into a lot of this. And then it launches in the US at the end of March, beginning of April. That's one resource. It's written, designed in a way to bring this to the masses on helping an organization succeed. My old company, Click, did an amazing job in letting me pioneer resources around data literacy, which will then impact. We have stuff on there from a data-driven perspective. And then Pluralsight, right? Part of it is mainly coming to us. One of the things that we offer is building the strategic side of this, building the strategy with you as an organization, and then building the paths, the assessments, the role IQs, everything that you need, also from a flow perspective that you see right in your front of you. We have the skill side, which is all the learning, et cetera, the flow side, which is the tracking, et cetera, and then myself coming in, helping an enterprise to build the correct culture and strategy to drive this forward. So you don't need to necessarily go anywhere else. Start here, and that's when we can build the strategy and everything else out for you.
Awesome. Perfect opportunity to plug that book. Next question. Can you speak to one or two specific examples in your data analytics journey that provide insights that you found remarkable? Maybe you already kind of touched on this with some examples, but
the number one insight that I would find or say here was learning that it has nothing to do with the data or technology that impacted organization's success with data, and that it was the culture of the organization. You can train a person to use a tool, you can train a person math formulas, you can do all of that. But it really boils down to, is the culture ready to do that? That understanding came because as I was building the data literacy journey, I was analyzing trends. I still do it across the world. Analyzing trends, figuring out what's going on, looking at what companies are wanting to do, from small companies to the biggest companies you've ever heard of. What are they trying to do? And I found, first off, Culture is the number one culprit of that. This is my own personal analysis. Secondly, through that analysis is that 5-step roadmap. If I go back 2 slides, this is this came because of analyzing things out there. This actually came from a study I helped participate in. This is modified and evolved to my personal use. How do we understand how organizations can do better? Through analyzing that, these insights came. Now, these are, of course, on a macro level. These are on a bigger level than maybe from an individual perspective that might be what you're looking for. But these, I would say, might be the 2 biggest insights that I've learned in my data and analytical journey.
That's great. We have a few more questions. I just want to make sure, Jordan, are you good to go close to the top of the hour?
Yeah. Let's go for about 5 more minutes. And
okay.
Anybody, I'll put this up for now. If you have a question that doesn't get answered, isn't answered sufficiently in a way that you found useful, or if a question pops up after, just shoot me messages on these channels and I'm happy to answer them.
Awesome. I love your Instagram handle. It's funny. I also dropped the links to the 2 Connect events. We got a couple questions about where people can learn more. So I actually dropped those right into the chat if anyone's interested in those. Next question, why do so many leaders state that they want better data to enable them to make decisions, but they don't support activities which cleanse the base data and get it into a fit state?
It's a great question. I'm trying to figure out a nice way of saying it. I mean, the reality of it is leadership gets stuck in a personal bias that they know best. And I hate to say it that way. But what leadership tends to do is they know they need to use data, but one of the things that I will give them like benefit of the doubt on, and there is a strong disconnect between leadership being in the positions that they are all the way down to where the data is pulled. This is why, in my opinion, the data storyteller and translator is such a big deal, because you need that role that can bridge that gap. We can shout until we're blue in the face from maybe a database administrator perspective, maybe a data analytics perspective. Leadership, we need this. But the problem is if leadership, they know they need it, but if they don't know why they need it, there's a big issue. So one of the things that I do when I when I speak to organizations around the world is we talk to them about, when I meet with executives, I don't talk about products basically at all. I talk pure strategy. But what I'm trying to do is build a foundational why in their mind. If I can help them understand why something matters. This is a great example going back to the ultra marathons. Diet matters so much. Why? Well, if I don't know why in the world am I going to eat better to improve performance? The same thing happens with executives. If we do not know why, as an executive, I need to do this more clearly, then they're not going to invest in it. The other thing that I will say to give from an executive per benefit of the doubt perspective is, to them, they are pulling the levers on budget. That's a big deal. If there are certain things, especially during the pandemic when budgets were just seized up and shrunk, it becomes a big deal not being able to pull the lever. But again, it all boils down to, does leadership understand the strategy and do they understand why? This is where I come in. So if any of you need me to come talk to leadership, invite me. I'd be happy to join.
That's great. Daryl asks, with a company or a team that has no data analytics or strategy, is it worth hiring a data scientist or someone to at least explore options? How can you build a data strategy if you don't have the person with the skills to know what is possible?
Yeah, great question. Yes, you should hire someone. I don't know if it needs to be a data scientist. Let's make that very clear. Data scientist, from a terminology perspective, has gotten very muddied over the years. A data scientist is literally someone, by pure definition, who uses the scientific method on data. They experiment, they do statistics, they do these things. They might not necessarily have the leadership skills and communication skills that you need to build the strategy. It could be that you find and hire a good data storyteller, someone comfortable with statistics, very good at analytics, but also understands the business side, allowing them to say, this is the vision that we need. I've got a great colleague out there, Cindy from ThoughtSpot, who is not just a chief data officer, but a chief data and decision officer. She understands the landscape. She is very brilliant in doing these things. That's what you're looking for, is the well-roundedness. If you just go for the technical, which is the data scientist side, you could run into some major issues, because sure, they could do great things with data. What if they have no idea how to meet objective business outcomes using data. That's a problem. So you've got to find a balance between all those skills.
That's great. I'm looking at the clock. I think maybe we have time for one more if that works for
Great.
you.
Yep, that's great.
Laura asks, once you have good data and you can analyze it, understand it, etc., how do you get employees speaking evidence-based language and making evidence-based decisions?
Oh, so this could be maybe one of the webinars I do in the future. In fact, I do think it's part of one in this series. This is a long answer. I'd ask you to send me a message on LinkedIn or something like that, and I can provide a more effective answer for anybody that wants to do that. Please do. You have to create a culture of data fluency. You have to create a culture where people speak the same language, right? I love to travel. If you've ever been to a country where English is not even a second language, you know very quickly how hard it is to get around. Imagine that happening in a business perspective where everybody is talking their own language of data. So what we do is we create a culture of data fluency where we get rid of the jargon, we get rid of the technical terms, we set proper data dictionaries, we set these things in place so that there is a common language spoken throughout the organization. It takes time, but when done correctly, there's an effective flow of communication and transparency. Much better, much easier to drive a data-driven organization if you do that versus not even acknowledging that that's a problem. And I can almost guarantee in 100% of the companies out there that this is a problem. So it is a part of a future webinar. I think we're doing those in the next couple months. So feel free to join that one, but also feel free to send me a message and I can dive into that topic a little bit more.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone that joined us today and for your patience as we resolve some of those issues earlier. Jordan, I wanted to give you the opportunity to maybe share one final takeaway with everyone here.
So the number one thing that, or number one takeaway that I would give is something I said earlier, and I say this all the time. Start where you are. You don't need to be a data scientist. You don't need to be technical. Become someone who knows how to use data, who's comfortable with that definition of data literacy. And if you're just starting your journey, find something that interests you within the world of data and analytics. It's vast. It's the same thing with like New Year's resolutions. People put these massive ambitious goals down for New Year's resolution and they have no desire to do those things, so they fail. Find an area in data and analytics that's interesting to you. It might not be anything special. Maybe you just like reading data. Whatever it is, start there, enhance your data literacy skills. Then you become basically your own evangelist within your organization to make it a better data-driven organization.
That's great. I love that. Well, thanks again, everyone that joined us. And we hope to see you in one of these upcoming events in the, part 2 webinar with Jordan. And until then, have a great rest of your day.